Okay, hi everyone. Hello, waves all around. My name is Stephanie Pereira. I'm the Director of Community Education here at Kickstarter. And I'm joining you today with an incredible and very special group, coast-to-coast group of people here on Google Hangouts. This is a live chat. We'll be doing it from 3 to 4 p.m. One of the super exciting things about it being live means that if you are watching now, sometime over the next hour, you can ask questions of any of us. Did we enable it for the Hangout in there? We did. Yeah, so if you want to ask a question here on Google Hangouts, you can, or if you want to tweet at us at Kickstarter Tips, you can do that there. But in the meantime, we're just going to dive right in. So, you know who I am. I want to introduce my amazing guest. I'm here with my colleague, John D'Amatos, who's actually in San Francisco today. Hi, John.
Hi, guys. I look over the design and tech categories and have worked at various phases with almost everybody on this chat.
And then we have 3 groups of teachers. The subject of today's conversation is teaching Kickstarter, and these are 3 groups who have been in various forms and settings using Kickstarter as a teaching platform, essentially, to work through the process of creating something, of designing something, and getting it from the sort of dark corners of your brain out into the world. So I'm just going to we're going to dive right into the conversation by way of intros, and we could have a great talk. So let's start with Christina and Gary. You guys are based here in New York. You're joining us from your office at Orbital. You regularly teach a class at SVA. So can you tell us a little bit, tiny bit, because we have so many of us and just a little bit of time, but a little bit about who you are, how you came to teach this class, what your Kickstarter experience was before you taught the class.
Christina.
Oh, wait, I know. Awkwardly, I was like, who's right there?
Hi, I'm Christina. So before I taught the class, I was actually working as sort of a professional Kickstarter helper person. I ran a company called Bread Pig, and what we really saw ourselves as was what we call a professional sidekick. So we helped a lot of comic creators and other artists, people who had huge fan bases or not, but we're really going through the crowdfunding thing for the first time and wanted help either with the logistical side of setting up shipping thousands of books, or just some advice and strategy help with how to put together their campaigns. So based on that work, Gary asked me to teach the class with him a few years ago, and I've since it's a tradition that everyone who teaches the class basically quits their job while they're teaching. So I ended up quitting that job, and now I'm an independent ethnographer. I ran my own Kickstarter campaign for the first time last year to go to fund a trip to China to do a bunch of research about emerging subcultures there.
So cool. Gary?
Yeah, and the course that Christina and I teach is called Entrepreneurial Design, and it's kind of more of a reality TV game show where we challenge the students to make $1,000 by the end of the semester using the internet. And they can do anything they want, but most of them end up doing crowdfunding projects. And it's kind of a fun ride for us because we see, it's like a game show. We don't really know what's going to happen until people do it, and that's what's made it fun to teach over the past 3 years that we've taught together.
And so you've taught over 3 years together, and how many times have you taught the class?
This is the 5th year in total. Yeah, and it's mostly stayed true to the structure. And yeah, I think the one kind of additional point I'll add that informs the genesis of it was, just that in a hyper-connected world today, there are so many things that designers can learn through the practice of doing things out in the open that you wouldn't get if you were just creating speculative work. And so, that led us to try to figure out what's a reasonable prompt that gets people going out there. And the struggle to put something with your name out there, the struggle to figure out what it is that you want to spend your time working on, all of that, is really hard to do. And we were able to find that these constraints of $1,000 by the end of the semester seem to get people going.
That's really cool. So let's go to Craighton. So Craighton Berman is joining us from his studio in Chicago. Craighton also has been doing this for a little while now and brings some interesting experience with the class. So maybe tell us about yourself and the class.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Craighton Berman. I run my own independent studio where I do everything from illustration to industrial design. And I also have my own brand that I started a couple years ago called Manual, where I do housewares, designed objects in housewares and cooking goods, things like that. But I'm also part-time adjunct faculty at University of Illinois at Chicago, so at UIC. And I teach a class called Entrepreneurial Product Development, which is a bit of a mouthful, but essentially it's a senior level industrial design class. This year I have 18 students who are in the class. They learn all about the world of going out on your own and launching your own products. Last year this is the second year I've taught it, so last year I had 11 students launch Kickstarter all at the same time. And then this year we had 18 Kickstarters launched at the same time. Which was kind of, I felt for myself, and I felt almost the same level of anxiety that they did. But it's a cool class. We're very focused on product design since it's an industrial design program. So everyone spends the first semester designing and developing these products, and then they launch in the first month of the second semester. And then they spend the rest of the semester fulfilling, and then some folks, go into the summer. Best case, they have a new side thing they're doing, a side hustle, and they're launching this. They keep making and selling the product. Other people just finish up the project and have that experience under their belt. But I guess the big high-level thing for me is, I think to learn about entrepreneurship, the best way to learn about it is to do it, and that's the whole spirit of it, especially design entrepreneurship. So it's really the whole class is framed around get out there and roll your sleeves up. Mistakes and do it, and Kickstarter is an awesome way for the kids to do that.
I love that, and I love the 2-semester model. That's really interesting. Before we move on to Sharon and Pablo, we have a question here in Google+. So just to clarify, all 3 of the groups joining us today have been teaching Kickstarter at the university level or grown-up level, I guess Gary and Christina for the one you did outside of SBA. And that is the experience that they have, but I'm sure as teachers they can riff on how to teach outside that setting. So Pablo and Sharon, hi.
Hi.
So same questions for you. Where did you come from? And tell us a little bit about your class.
Do you want to start with that, Pablo?
Sure. Well, I'll say that the class is at the School of the Arts of Chicago, SAIC. It's called the Venture Studio, and it also is a 1-year-long class. And it's the first time we're running this class, so we're kind of learning through doing this with our 10 students. And well, it started because we were interested in asking the question, like, how do artists and designers of any discipline work with Kickstarter? Basically, how do you form a practice? And so since SAIC is a place where interdisciplinarity is such a huge part of the student experience, I think we're the only Kickstarter class that is open to any discipline within the school. So it's non-disciplinary. We have artists, illustrators, designers, product designers, all types in this class. So we're testing now to see, like, well, I'm a ceramicist, so I want to start a pottery studio. I'm a painter, I want to work that way. I want to design the next cool thing. How do we do that?
Cool, and then just real quick, you have run a Kickstarter project.
Yes, so I did do a Kickstarter in 2013 called the Neo Lucida, which was a modern interpretation of an ancient, obsolete optical drawing aid. So that was a surprise success, and it gave me a lot of good Kickstarter experience. And I also have a campaign going right now, which is a kind of a silly little memento mori tattoo. So you can look that up and see. It's already been funded because it had a $100 goal.
Very cool. And Sharon?
Yeah, I'm happy also to be teaching this class within the art school context, since it is not just about product design, it's about how to use Kickstarter as a tool, whether if you're a visual artist, fashion designer. Hopefully we'll get some painters in here in the next session, and seeing Kickstarter as sort of an alternative to the gallery space. Like, how can you connect directly to your audience without any of those traditional filters?
Yeah, cool. And go on.
And during the time that this class has been taking place, I was able to successfully finish fulfilling my first Kickstarter project. It was pretty funny because for about a 2-week period, things were getting a little bit stressful, and I was like, oh my God, what if this goes horribly wrong while I'm teaching this class? But luckily it didn't. It went wonderfully well, and I can, bask in the joy of that and share my experience with our students.
Yeah, you all did a wonderful job. For those of you watching, Sharon and her partner did a project called the 4-No Oven. Right? Correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, 4-No Oven. And then also I wanted to clarify too that Pablo and Sharon are joining us from their class.
Yeah.
So this is the real life look at what it's like to run one of these classes inside a university.
Exactly.
Cool. So just checking out my cheat sheet here. So I love that you all are doing this, and I love that you're doing it in the sort of formal classroom setting. We know lots of people sort of use this model in different ways. I've talked to probably 1 million people over the 4+ years I've worked here. John, who's here too, has probably talked to a ton of people who would like to teach a class in their own school. And we know that pitching it to the school administrators, figuring out where it fits in the curriculum, what students it's for, all of that can be kind of difficult to figure out. So we would love to hear back from you on that experience of how you pitched it in and what you needed to do to make it happen. I should throw it to one of you specifically. Craighton, go.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm the best person to speak to this. So I inherited the class. Designer who's run a couple Kickstarters. Used to run the class for a year at UIC, and then it was passed to me when he moved on to another institution. So I don't know fully how it was pitched in. I do know that a lot of the students are really excited about it. I mean, the fact that I went from 11 to 18 each year was a very large leap. And everyone I run into talks about it. And the school seems to like it. The department does, at least, because it gets, it's gotten some good press. The Tribune, Chicago Tribune, wrote about it. Other outlets as well. So I think it's something that especially in the industrial design department is seen as very valuable, very current for right now. But as far as specifically, how to get it in there, I think maybe some of the other folks might have a better angle on that.
Yeah, I know, Pablo. I know I've talked to you about it.
We had a little bit of a challenge early on trying to get the course kind of brought to life. I think there were a few administrators who were not sure what Kickstarter was, how it worked. One of the things that I did after my Kickstarter success was I wrote some memo to the deans about, like, hey, this is really cool, like, it's an amazing experience. And on a personal level, training as an architect, I always had a sense of, like, well, if I'm teaching students architecture, there's a profession waiting for them. But now I'm at a school where there are a lot of art students who don't know what their career will look like. So in a way, this was a way to address what do you do with an art degree? And so that's how I pitched it to upper administration. And it took a couple of years with someone who was really in the research arm of the school to kind of back it and say, we should make this a course. And then from there, I actually moved pretty quickly. So it was a bit of a first to kind of get people kind of understanding what the course could be. And we were fortunate enough to find an administrator who was like, we need to do this, and you're the person to do it, so how do you want to do it?
Yeah, that's great. How long was that process?
Well, the first time I wrote the memo and suggested it took about 2 years of just kind of getting people to understand, not finding the right person to kind of talk to. But once we had one person on board, it was months. Just like in the spring, I said, hey, Pablo, do you want to teach this? And we'll find someone to teach it with you, we'll find you a room, we'll get you some resources, we'll make this happen, just figure it out. So it took a while just to get a little traction, and then it was as simple as like, oh, let's put it together fast. And that's why we're kind of learning on the fly, because we didn't have a lot of prep time in a way. But then Sharon kind of was found by her interest in, like, hey, I want to be part of this class. And we met for coffee. It's like, great, we're doing this class.
That's great. And Gary and Christina, Gary, you're the guy, so tell us.
Yeah, I think this is similar to Craighton's story. You know, the entrepreneurial design was part of SVA's curriculum. We teach at the MFA in Interaction Design program. It's a 2-year program, about 14, 20 students every year. And this has been something that's been part of the course. And the faculty is mostly adjuncts, so there's a fair amount of rotation. And Liz Danzico, who's the chair of the program, you know, she had a pretty clear sense that there was a shift happening where, you know, the people that would graduate from the program wouldn't necessarily just go into agencies or companies, but that they were starting to make things. And I think back then it was mostly digital products that they were starting to make. So she was really interested in bringing in kind of a set of outsiders. You know, myself and Christina Casiopo, who co-created the course with me. You know, we have a design. We're familiar with the design, but we're not trained designers. You know, much less feel like we're responsible or like qualified to teach at a master's program. But she was open to bringing in people that came from startups and understood, you know, that world in technology, and so she gave us a lot of license to play with how we wanted to approach it. We were very familiar with Kickstarter, since Kickstarter was a portfolio company of the firm that we worked at, and that seemed like a really great way to, you know, get people going. But when we started, only 2 people did Kickstarter projects, of the set. Most of them were trying other types of ways to make money, and I think in this current year, pretty much everybody is doing a Kickstarter project now.
So interesting. John, do you have questions for our amazing guests?
I do, actually, for what Gary said. What do you think changed in terms of the first class where a couple of people did it, and then the latest class where almost everybody did it? Was it internal in the class culture, or was it like external forces like success on Kickstarter?
You know, I think it's a whole host of things, to be honest, right? One, the familiarity of crowdfunding, it's become more normative. Whereas in 2011 or 2012, it was still a little bit on the fringe. You know, I think 2, you know, they're designers, and so they're longing for something that looks, you know, like a nicely encapsulated piece. And I think that the constraints of a Kickstarter project, you know, you have to tell the story. You have to be able to kind of identify what your goal is. You have to identify the, you know, the rewards, which are the interface by which people can engage. There's something about the constraints of that are just generally helpful for the creative process. So
I would say too that we've pushed them more towards Kickstarter, I think, as the years have gone on. Last year we didn't we were trying to encourage them to build communities, and they explored that in a bunch of different ways, but it turns out that that's such an abstract, vague concept that it can be really hard for them to wrap their mind around what does it mean to build a community around something that you're doing. Whereas with Kickstarter, I think there's very clear metrics, there's very clear constraints. It's a format that they can use to then kind of center whatever it is that they're doing. They can run a Kickstarter campaign about almost any project.
So to kind of, yeah.
I was just saying, just to piggyback on that too, it's like, you know, like it or not, school is the chunks of time the semester, right? And what's nice about a Kickstarter is there's a definite amount of time that you're accelerated through, and you can't drag your heels moving without you or not. So it works really well as like a tool in that structure, because you got to get these projects done, you know. So it's I like that. It's not more abstract exploration is great and it should be done, but you really get the experience 0 to 100 by using that as a structure.
Does it affect, and this is for Craighton, does this affect the like the actual product design process? Does it affect what the students are actually designing and who it's for?
Yeah, I think it does 100%. I think both semesters I experienced this at the beginning. It's very open, very blue sky brainstorming, and many of the students kind of get it. They kind of get what you can really do in the amount of time we have. Also, with all the other requirements to launch a Kickstarter, everything from business sourcing to fulfillment and manufacturing on their side. They know there's a lot of work in there, so a lot of them tended to look for projects that either utilize manufacturing they could do themselves. So maybe it's just a mini mass-produced thing they do themselves in the school shop, or maybe at their own shop. Maybe a level up from that, people outsource. So soft goods have been really popular, sewn goods, because either you can sew it yourself or you can find a seamstress or a student that's looking to maybe pick up some extra. We're not talking about thousands of objects here. Most of the students are making anywhere between 5 and maybe 100 of of what they're doing. And as an aside, I always tell them you're going to learn more by doing 5 and getting it out there than you would by not doing any at all. Or, you know, the difference between doing 5 and doing 200, it's not worth your time in school. I think it's better to shoot small and see what it's like to go through the whole process. But anyway, yeah, they're choosing things like, or I guess the last category would be like rapid manufacturing with laser cutting, CNC, stuff like that. So a lot of people were designing things that were simple in manufacturing process. They didn't take a lot of you know, different processes and things that you can only do at high order quantities, like injection molding, like anything that has to be put into a mold like that. It's, you know, if you're a designer, you know that it's very, very expensive. It takes a lot of time. So I think, yeah, the answer is I think in general they tended to pick simpler ideas. Doesn't mean the ideas aren't as valid. It doesn't mean they're not worth pursuing. It just meant that they could really get the idea nailed, hopefully, get the product nailed, and then focus on all their things they have to do for the campaign.
Yeah, just to jump in super quick, for anyone watching the video now or later on, there's links to the course pages for each of these classes, and the link for Craighton points to their Tumblr, which shows all the class projects, so you can get a sense of what he's talking about when he says like simple things that can be done kind of pretty easily. John, did you have more to add, or should I jump back?
Well, I was going to ask Christina a little bit about how her experience with Bread Pig informed conversations around fulfillment with the students, kind of piggybacking on what Craighton was saying in terms of like scale, expectations, work that goes into actually fulfilling a project.
Yeah, I think it definitely had a very big impact. I remember going in basically the first day of class and just being like, international shipping, guys, let's talk about it. We'll do it. I think I tend to come in with very, very specific, like hyper-specific tactical tips about how to, I think I've just seen a lot of creators figure out how to navigate the difference between their ambition and what will make them happy in life 4 months down the line, and so I try to encourage our students to think of that, which is it's a tricky process to navigate, because at the same time we're trying to get them to think outside the box and think big and have these grand visions, and then we say, okay, now that you're thinking this big, like we need you to figure out how to take the first step and realize that it's not, you know, your first step is not going to be the whole thing. It's going to get you there, and if you want to keep going, you can keep going. So there's a lot of dramatic scoping that happens for sure.
Wait, I was going to say, just add one more thing to that. I think that's a great point about scaling it to the right size. I think I told a lot of my students to make sure they limit the number they're going to do, but also like don't think a Kickstarter is a one-time thing. Like if you find out after fulfilling it that you really liked it, you can launch another one in 6 months. So I think that's an awesome point that he was making.
Yeah, it's really great to hear these seasoned teachers saying things that we've certainly been discovering and feeling very strongly, especially about, you know, the first Kickstarter doesn't have to be the $10 million one. You can start small. You can keep growing it up. So that reinforcement's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially because Sharon and Pablo, you both did run very big projects for your first project. Not whether on purpose or not. I know with Neo Lucida, it was meant to be a small project. So you know firsthand how that can get away from you.
Yeah, what's funny is how we try to show students examples of a project that makes sense for them. And I often say, don't look at my project.
Yeah.
It was a runaway, big, overwhelming project that took a lot of unexpected energies. But it's trying to figure out, here's a $1,000 project, here's a $2,000 project, and here are some ones that are really just kind of beautiful examples of like a single person doing an idea, executing it, getting it out there, building an audience, and then the comfort of doing that again. Because for a lot of students, they're showing us what their practice might want to be. They're giving us a certain example of like, oh, well, I don't envision being a product designer forever. I just want to try this one thing. And it gives them a test bed, and they're teaching us like what their campaign might be about.
I'm also happy that in addition to being able to draw on Kickstarter experience, I've also been able to draw on my experience of running a business for 6 years where we've done a lot of wholesale design. So I've had to learn about the world of dropship testing and, you know, package design and how to optimize things based on weight and dimensions. So there are just a lot of skills I'm really happy to have. And this might be something that you're going to bring up. I just want to make sure I mention it, that I can't imagine how Craighton does what he does, being a single teacher versus a team teacher, especially with 18 students. You are a god. That's amazing. But it's been great to be a team teacher since Paulo and I have very different backgrounds. Our Kickstarters were such radically different products, and considering the diverse range of students that we have and the diversity of their projects, I feel really fortunate that we have both of us to be able to give them good feedback on their myriad number of details.
Yeah, that's incredible. I do want to hear from Craighton on that. Before we do, we actually have a pretty great question from one of our viewers that wants to know the percent of time spent on developing the product or the idea or whatever it is that your students are working on, and then thinking about the communications part of it, the building the community part of it. I know Gary and Christina, a lot of what you do, I've seen your syllabus. It's online for those of you watching. But can you guys all speak to that? Because that is two big parts of the Kickstarter project, right?
Yeah, I was very jealous of Craighton earlier when he said he had 2 semesters to work with. That sounds very luxurious. So we have, about 12 weeks, I think, 12 to 13 weeks basically before their Kickstarter project has to be finished. So this year, we tweak this every year, I think, but this year we basically spent the first 2 to 3 weeks trying to get them to an idea that they felt comfortable exploring. And then we had a milestone where they had to give a talk about that idea, which was really, a good time to figure out whether they were really into it or not. And some of them from there went on to pivot, but we just kind of kept marching ahead. Had another milestone a few weeks later where they basically had to present a draft of their idea to a bunch of advisors who worked in the industry who would give them feedback on things. So our process is very much just kind of like pick an idea and then figure out the details as you go along.
Yeah.
Because I think our class is as much about learning how to iterate and learning how to work publicly and vulnerably, I guess, as it is about actually designing a concrete product.
And I think one thing that I would add to that is it's highly variable how much time you spend on the ideation versus the execution versus the community building, because it's specific to the person and specific to the project idea. And there's also this other weird phenomena where it might actually take the act of launching your project for you to find the community and the base that will support you. And so it's this really weird chicken or the egg thing. And as teachers, we're just trying to make sure that they don't bite off too much so that they're not destroyed by the process of putting themselves out there in this way. But we're very much kind of, there's an element of risk to everything. And I think it's kind of part of what we want them to learn and understand, that they're going to have to confront that same sense of confronting risk in whatever projects they do in the future.
Yeah, what about Sharon, Pablo, what about you two?
Well, weirdly, we started off the semester by giving the students a $100 goal 1 week campaign assignment to give them a sense of what the whole thing is like. But then weirdly, like each project, because the students are coming from such different backgrounds, they all have very different timelines. And so one of the challenges became, how do we kind of customize for each student what it is that they need to get started, execute, and fulfill. So we have some students who actually are trying to do like 3 or 4 campaigns in 1 year. So we have 2 15-week semesters, so it's 30 weeks. So to make everyone jealous, it's not only twice as long as Craighton's, but it's twice the number of people, or rather twice the length of Gary and Christina. So we've got 4 times the power. But at the same time, each student has a much more customized experience because each one is kind of trying to achieve different things. So we have one student who's actually trying to make a really beautiful kind of high-end electronic clock with Bluetooth speakers. And we connected them with some of the people we know in China. So he's going through the full like product design model. We have another one who wants to make fun stickers of butts. Kind of just like print them and put them in a nice little package, and people can stick them up anywhere and have fun with them. So, obviously she's got a very different timetable and a lot of different prototyping needs. So weirdly, like when we had the first project, everyone was kind of on the same schedule, but we quickly started to realize that doesn't make any sense to create artificial milestones for the various projects. And I think that what we're learning is some of these projects take longer than a year. I mean, we were talking about with some of these projects, it could be almost like an MFA level 2-year-long class, because if you go from, I mean, if you have to do a few prototypes with China and you have to really build up a whole project, it could take a lot longer than just a year. So we're struggling with just like, customizing the length of design time versus kind of building the campaign.
So that's interesting. That's different than what Craighton had described, and certainly what Christina just described, where they really encourage students to choose something that really fit within the constraints of the class.
That's definitely the case. I mean, I feel like this class is it's feeling very much like an independent study, and there are some people who are creating really innovative, incredible projects, and they might not even finish it within the 2 semesters. And we've been okay with that and encouraging them to take the class again next year because they're doing things that are so interesting. But as Pablo said, everybody did start with the $100 campaign. So everybody has already launched a project and they've had that full experience. But it's been interesting to see how I think some of the people in this class are treating this almost like a startup product incubation experience.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
One thing to add to that about something, and it was interesting to hear you guys talk about how some projects want to go longer than a year. I actually encountered a lot of that last year. Mine basically breaks up. The first semester is broken into thirds. Each month, the first month is kind of finding your concept. The second month is turning that concept into a product that can be, mass produced. And then the last month is really focused on telling the story. And we start working within the Kickstarter framework. Like we start our draft things back at the second month, but the third month is really focused on bringing it to life. See, the trick there though is it's the holidays at that point. So it's really long project. So it has to be in that second semester. I wish it could be earlier because everyone knows fulfillment takes a lot of time. Like by fulfillment I mean making the thing and shipping it. But essentially, we come back, and the second semester is there's a little bit of a run-up to get ready, about a month running the project, and then only about 6 weeks to actually, fulfill. And so I guarantee some of the projects are going to go into the summer. I guess there's 2 thoughts off of that. So that I experienced last year, I gave a lot of leash to a lot of the stronger students. I kind of gave them a long leash and said, hey, if it goes into the summer, like, I get it, like, I'm here for you. And most people fulfilled, but there were still a few that, they graduated, and I don't have their email addresses anymore. I'm not there for so, I don't really have any way to help them. And I've reached out to a few that are still struggling, but that's only a few. But still, it's a thing that this year is much more on my mind. I have a couple exchange students that are in Chicago from Brazil, and I told them, like, we really got to plan these projects so that the minute you graduate, you can make sure you're fulfilling and you're done. Because when you're on a train or a flight back to Brazil, like you don't want to be trying to figure out international shipping. It's like that kind of stuff. Some of those constraints, I'm totally in the camp of you guys about. All the projects are different, and some need more time than others. Others, like there's these real life constraints, and I'd rather see someone succeed than struggle when they're trying to, figure their place out in the world. And not to say it's going to happen, but it's just something that I'm very keen or aware of this year.
Well, there's no real life constraint like angry backers. So.
Which I'm going to jump in for a second. I think this brings up a really interesting question of how do you balance out the long-term reputation of the class and the school with the reputation of individual students who are creators, and it's their solo actions that determines whether or not a backer is satisfied.
Yeah, that's tough. Without going into too much detail, I definitely have done some thinking about that because there was one project that I'm having a hard time getting the student to re-engage. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Christina and Gary have more perspective because they've been doing it longer. I don't know. Right now, it mostly looks really good for the school because the vast majority of the projects are successful. The students communicate really well. This year I actually had every student put at the bottom of their Kickstarter like a link to the class and the fact that it was for a class. So hopefully that really, for those that back it, they understand that I mean, typically with Kickstarter, right, it's not a store, that's the whole thing, right, in this category. But added to that, like not only is this, you're not buying a product, but you're also helping a student learn. So it's like this extra level of risk, I guess. But ironically, actually, I think most of them are very, very responsible and really feel like it's more than the class. It's their name, and they're going out in the world as professionals. Many of them want to work independently. You know, when we all know this, everyone here, like your name on the internet is kind of like the most important thing you need to uphold at this point. So.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, I think Craighton's totally right, and we always make a point to remind people that once the project is live, it's going to always be there. So that means, don't make typos, but it also means don't do anything stupid that you're going to regret.
Yeah, I don't know if it's come up for our class, just because, well, one, I think the students have been pretty good about fulfilling, which they have to do in the summer. And maybe we're ruining their summers collectively. But it's an interaction design program. So the majority of those students are graduating, they're getting a job at an agency, a software company, a startup, and it feeds into the recruiting process in a way, because these companies are looking for examples of things that people have done that are out in the world rather than speculative work. And so they're incentivized to scope it well, they're incentivized to make it something that they can execute, and they're mostly not taking on projects with a few exceptions, they're mostly not taking on projects with the same level of complexity as I think some of the ones from you all's students.
Yeah, related to all of this, I know when I've spoken to schools in the past and other teachers who are trying to get these things going, there were always a lot of questions and a lot of nerves around this idea of encouraging students to launch this project, which would put them into this territory where they're collecting money from strangers from around the world, they're making promises to deliver something at a certain time. I mean, I've heard you guys all speak about it a little. Like, how did you deal with that question or how do you deal with that question when talking to school administration or other people outside the class?
Yeah, I guess this might be the slightly unofficial answer for my school, so I don't want to speak for them, but from my perspective and what I tell the students, they're all design students, so using a spreadsheet is something that's somewhat either scary or alien to them for most cases. But it's a big part of my class where we set up a little mini business model, and you're putting in, as you're working on prototyping, you're putting in all your costs that you're accruing and will accrue. You're factoring in shipping costs and packaging and stuff like that. Obviously, there's Kickstarter fees and credit card fees, so they're pretty aware of what their number is they're trying to hit. And in most cases, they're putting in profit margins because that's part of learning to be an entrepreneur. But in most cases, I know that any profit they're going to make is probably going to go into the fund for the Kickstarter. Because it just happens with any project you do, whether it be putting an extension on your house or whatever. Like, it always goes 20 to 30% over what you think it's going to be, or more. So as far as money coming in, I tell most of the students, don't think of this as a cash grab at all. Like, think of it as a class where you're not paying for your books and supplies. You're hopefully breaking even in the class and learning. And there'll be a few students who they were going for like starting a small business basically, so they're going to have some extra money that they're going to have to deal with. But I think for the most part, I don't look at it. They are handling other people's money and they need to be respectful of that. But I don't look at it as like someone's going to. I think the school is not as concerned because they see that. We're not talking about $20,000, $30,000 projects. We're talking like $2,000 to $4,000. So.
Yeah, I'm curious with Pablo and Sharon. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump in. So one of the things that early on, we had the same kind of question, like, oh, wait a minute, these students are going to be getting money. And more importantly, like, they're going to be using school resources to do prototypes, and does that cause a problem? And fortunately, I think SAIC is very kind of forward-thinking about it and also very friendly about letting students kind of experiment with this stuff. So we had to kind of talk about intellectual property, for example. Like, who gets to keep the IP when the students make something that makes money? Fortunately, we have a very good policy already in place, so it's not a problem. Also, we have situations like 2 students who are on international visas who can't collect money for being here, so we had to kind of create a system by which they are not kind of in danger of being deported for succeeding on a Kickstarter project. So there's definitely a lot of talk about this And I think in a way it's emblematic of like the problem with teaching these professional practice skills in school. Like usually you either explain to students, this is what a professional practice looks like, and they go, yeah, okay, fine. Or they go to an internship and they don't have school around them. But here we're kind of mixing the two things together in a way that gives them a certain amount of autonomy and also kind of real responsibility. But systematically there are a lot of questions that come up, like, yeah, where does the money go? And if the students are using the laser cutter for 20 hours, does that somehow mean that SAIC gets some money out of it? I mean, fortunately, we've worked all this stuff out, but on the fly, questions that our administration didn't usually have to deal with, like, oh yeah, our students are now making cash.
Yeah.
And even a student who did a quick little project made a couple $100s, and we're like, hey, great, now you're a professional artist. But you're still in school. And so everyone's fine, but there's definitely a lot of conversations about the economics of a school allowing students to profit.
Yeah, totally. John, you want to jump back in?
I wanted to ask Gary and Christina about their experience with the student that ran the Upstanding Desk project and what that was like in terms of like expectations and how you advised that student like during the course of his kind of breakout campaign.
Sure. So those, it was actually two students, Mikey Chen and Sam Carmichael. They came into the class with this idea already done. It was actually a prototype they had built in a class the previous semester, and they had heard the reputation of the class. They knew that they had to make $1,000, so they came in, had the idea, and were ready to go. I think the part of that teaching process that was the funniest to me, I had just started teaching, was that it then took them so long to actually decide to launch because, I think this goes back to our conversation about constraints. Part of the reason why we're pretty hard about the constraints that we set forth is because these are design students, right? They're perfectionists at heart, and if we let them, they will just tweak pixels for the rest of eternity rather than launch. And so this was a perfect example of that, where they had the idea, everything was good, and they like literally couldn't decide on colorways for 3 weeks or something until we finally were like, you know what, just put up a pre-sale and then see what colors people want, and then you'll know. And so that was a very clear case of us kind of pushing them out the door and saying, you're ready. But as a result of all of their preparedness, they were the first project to launch in our class. And it was actually, I think, a little intimidating for the rest of the students because, I think we had an inkling that it was going to go well, but we didn't think it was going to take off quite like that. With the rest of the class kind of looking on and being like, wow, their project just broke $100,000. And luckily our administration, didn't, as far as I know, has never asked us any hard questions about this. But, they were immensely successful right off the bat, and I think it put a lot of pressure on the other students, for better and for worse, about how they saw their own projects.
Right.
So, yeah, it was an interesting mixed impact.
And I think one thing I'll add to this, which is from a practice of teaching, is that the cohort is so important. In cultivating a healthy cohort that is willing to trust each other, and willing to share what they're learning with each other, and is willing to support each other, is a huge part of helping people break through a lot of the emotional hurdles that they're going to run into. It's everything from kind of trying to keep people from being a perfectionist and get things out there, as well as like having the confidence to know that that hey, maybe no one else knows what they're doing either. And it's hard to teach kind of these experiential learning programs, I think, without having that. And it's assumed, I think, in an educational model, like in an educational institution. But I've tried kind of side projects of kind of teaching people one-on-one, and what I realized was missing was, they don't have a cohort, and so therefore, yeah.
It's also really interesting, just thinking about how most people do these projects. Pablo, you had a collaborator. Sharon, you had a collaborator. Craighton, you work on your own. You're the loner.
Actually, just a thought on that. I forced all my students to work individually. I remember looking at Gary and Christina's class and really liking the teamwork thing, but they're working with grad students. I'm working with undergrad. I just perceived the difference. I thought would be useful for them to be working solo. But it was funny, halfway through this semester, the students, every student has a Tumblr, and I require all of them to blog. We have guests every single week. We have entrepreneurial designers come in, they write about those, they write about their project. And during the campaign, I wanted them to write about the emotions they were going through and the experiences they were having. They do that really well, and I have the main class blog vlogs the best stuff, and I really love that dynamic. To answer the previous question, that's how I manage 18 students, is I spend countless hours the rest of the week surfing on their Tumblrs and reading what they're thinking. But to the previous point, we're in class and we're talking, and I'm trying to get them, we're happy. Come on, guys, what's going on? What are you feeling? And they're all kind of quiet. And finally someone goes, we just don't have much to say because we all talk on our Facebook group that we made, and we've all been trading stories all week long, so we just have nothing to tell you.
Yeah.
But actually, that's the best thing. They set up their own group to vent and talk about things that happen and the strategies and all this stuff. And they, to Gary's point, they were working individually, but their cohorts were the 17 or 18 other folks. Doing it in real time, so it was awesome.
Something about, again, Gary's comment about the importance of the cohort and students working together. I think since all of us have done Kickstarters, we know just how many things you actually have to do to make the Kickstarter happen. So it's been really great to see our students come together to do video for each other, or use somebody who's got an apartment with really great light as the place where they're all shooting their product videos. And they're literally just sort of pooling their resources together. So I think that, yeah, the cohort is incredible.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Oh, and just one other point too is we've been fortunate because there are other classes in SVA's interaction design program that don't intentionally feed into this, but we benefit from it, right? So Jill Nussbaum teaches a course on design fictions, which helps people through the process of learning how to construct a narrative and actually how to shoot a video. And so by the time they get to the point in our class where they're ready to launch, it's like they magically know how to use a camera. They magically know how to construct this video. They take a prototyping class as well. They're taking all these other things, and so that's what's allowed us to show up and just be game show hosts and set the constraints and things happen.
That's something related to Pablo said earlier. It's not only is it the cohort of the classroom, but they're within a school where there's other classes and other resources to draw on, whether it's a laser cutter or something else they're learning, or even other students and professors.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we have is trying to figure out how to leverage other courses that students could take, because we find ourselves being both not both, but more than just teachers. We're talking about Kickstarter, we're talking about here's what a spreadsheet is, here's how to make a good video, here's how to Photoshop your images, there's so many parts, and even just getting them to write in a very kind of Kickstarter way, the pitch, the kind of very plain spoken, very kind of affirmative language is really, really hard. And we realized quickly we're kind of not equipped, so we've had guests come in, but I'm hoping that in future versions we can do what Gary is suggesting, have other faculty whose specialty is, I think design fiction is fantastic, and I would love to have that kind of course built into a much larger curriculum so that it can support a class like this. But it is a lot to do in one class, because a lot of the students are looking at us wait, I've never made a video, or wait, I thought I explained it really clearly, and we're like, no, you're using a lot of jargon and you're not explaining it at all. So how do we basically get kind of more coursework to support it, and then it starts to seem more like the whole curricular idea about entrepreneurship as opposed to a single class.
Yeah, so actually it's interesting because the voice that's absent from this conversation, some other folks we have talked to many times over the years, are the guys over at the D School who run a class called StoryBiz. And it's the StoryBiz class, the purpose of it is to enable students to learn all that storytelling stuff. So if you go to they have a website for their class as well, you can see that storytelling stuff, making the video, learning how to perform. They have a whole unit just on performing your idea. They also have stuff on drafting. And that, because for them, it's less about developing the product and the design, because students are competent designers. They're getting that outside of the class. It's more about the soft skills that come with, just like you were talking about, Pablo, that you forget are so essential to making this stuff.
I think a lot of the skills, not to discount any of that, because I think I'd like to take all those courses. They all sound awesome. There's also something to the hustle and just working it out for yourself. So I think like in our case, we had guests every week, and in the first semester, every single guest had run a Kickstarter. I'm looking at the list here. Like Yield Design, Studio Neat has run a bunch of them. Super Mechanical has run a couple. One has failed that Super Mechanical did, and he was open and shared about that with the students. We had Peter Mueller come in. He's with Meissen, the knife company, in the middle of their campaign. So it was great to bring in all these folks. CW&T, who did this amazing pen that was like following that campaign's fulfillment, was one of the best things I ever did. The pen's great too, but I guess the point of me saying all this is I would have my students listen to these guests, and then hopefully, I think what many of them did is go to their pages and just analyze them, and just analyze the way they talk about it, the way they're, we looked at a bunch of slick videos from the first few, and then suddenly we see CW&T come in with the most earnest, like, laptop video where their daughter runs into the camera. So it's great to see the highs and the lows, and like there's certain expectations about Kickstarter about the way it should be, and then there's the reality of there's no way it needs to be. You make it you, and if it works that way, that's the best because it's you. So anyway, it's really cool. I totally agree that there's resources that I would love to take more advantage of in the university, but there's also the hustle resources. Like just go look at a lot of them and understand what's good, what you like, what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, one thing we try desperately to teach the students every year, hopefully get a little bit of success around, is teaching them how to ask for help, especially from the internet. So a lot of it is like trying to get them to open up and write in public and reach out to people on Twitter. We try to ask them to cold email people or get introductions to people that they need, because we know we can't teach them everything in the short span of a semester, and we don't really have most of these skills, to be completely honest. So the best thing we can do is to sort of train them to figure out how people figure this out in real life, which is through networks and through people.
And I think there's like two themes here to note, and I think both Craighton and Pablo touched on this, which is we've, at least for me personally, I've had to kind of get comfortable with the defaults of the process being complete and utter chaos. And so
that's huge.
And so when your default understanding is that this thing is going to be pure chaos, it then allows you to then figure out how you create systems that place some constraints on it. So most of the tweaks that Christina and I have made this year have really been about like containing the chaos a bit and allowing for the students to leverage each other more effectively, and so forth. And I think to Craighton's point about one of the things I really love about his course is that the students have such a strong I think sense of working in public, and that's been something that we've tried to emphasize as well, but I think it varies based on the personality of the students and based on the personality of the class. And one of the benefits of that is I think what Craighton talks about, which is that by familiarizing yourself with the whole tapestry of narratives that are out there, you're going to figure out what you can borrow from each one to then apply to your own case. But there's also been this really secondary effect where we've started to leverage the blog posts from students in the first year that I've taught, from like the alumni into like the current year, right? Because they all have the same experience, and so there's almost these like slices of who they were kind of along their entire kind of journey. And so the more if you're thinking about teaching a course like this, the more you can kind of encourage the people that you teach to share the exhaust of the process, the easier it will get over the years, because you will be able to leverage that exhaust in the teaching that you do. So if someone gets lost, I can just go and find the one post that most resembles this case and send it along to the person, and that's been really
cool.
That's great. Creating your own archive.
And back to what Craighton and Gary touched on. We actually do force our students to do every week kind of post to a Google Doc, what we're calling This Week in Kickstarter, where they are all kind of looking at campaigns and then sharing them with us, but not based on like good campaigns, but they're just like, I really like this video, or I really like the way this person talks about it. Someone this week just showed me one that's like, I just love that they use really beautiful GIFs in their story. Like the GIFs were really effective. And so we are trying to get them, it took us a while to realize that, oh yeah, there's so much deep buried inside of Kickstarter of successful campaigns that are often smaller and overlooked, but have a very different way of telling their story that isn't just the kind of textbook polished video, and some of them are really clever. And so the students we're trying to leverage the students' own interest to kind of find campaigns like that so we can share them. So every week, first hour of the day, we just look at all of these different campaigns that they're sharing so we can say, ooh, that's a really bad video, or that's a bad video, but they made a lot of money. Why? Or this is just really great text. I wish I wish I could write like this, a student would say. So it really is kind of like trying to figure out the depths of what's possible, because there's so many campaigns that most of us never see that might fit one of our students' interests.
Something that's stuck in my head from Ted Burdett, Sharon's husband and partner in the business. Last night he was speaking at UIC. He's a professor there, and he proposed that Kickstarter pages could be the new portfolio. And I just love that mind. That's been sticking in my mind all morning. Thinking back, because we're all design teachers, and all students come out of the program hopefully with a good portfolio to show. And one thing I've felt ever since I graduated was the limitations of a portfolio to tell at least my personal story. I feel like I have so much to explain, but all I'm supposed to put in there is a drawing and a final picture, and maybe in person I can kind of give some more color to it. I love that idea that there's so many different ways to tell the story, Pablo's point, within there, like from video to text to the way you structure rewards to everything. That I love that it kind of goes to whatever strengths you have to be built up in that story, and can really just tell a very complete kind of narrative about what you make and how you do it.
That's incredible. I love that. And we have 4 minutes left, so I want to put one more question to you all, if that's okay, John? Yeah? We've talked about a lot. We've covered so much. What is the absolute best part of teaching this class? Start with Sharon.
I think it's just incredible to see how, and it's funny, the student is literally like 10 feet away from me that I'm just thinking about, how the realness of this class makes people just blossom, for lack of a better metaphor, where they want to go big, they want to make it real. They, for the most part, seem very unafraid. And it really just blows my mind as a model for education, because sometimes, as teachers, you get a little bit bummed out because students seem kind of bored by the projects. But in this class, no one ever seems bored. They're only doing exactly what they want to be doing it, and they're making it as big and as real as they possibly can. So it's inspiring.
It's incredible. Pablo?
Ditto.
Cop out.
Running out of time.
Okay, that's fine if it's really ditto. Yeah, cool.
Yep.
All right, Gary?
I think for me it's, like my philosophy around teaching is actually that it's really selfish, right? That it's not an act of me, giving to other people so much as what I get, in return. And so when I work with the students that I work with, what I'm really doing is building a pattern library for myself, so that as I'm working on stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, that's that thing that so-and-so ran into. Like, what did I tell them? Oh, okay, I should do that too. And so it's been kind of therapy, and it's an excuse for me to hang out with Christina.
Nice. And Christina?
I think the coolest moments in teaching the class, especially now that we're on our 3rd year, is the moments when you kind of sometimes you're like, maybe nobody learned anything, right? And then a year or two later, we've been starting to hear these stories pop up of students coming up to us and saying, we really struggled with the project in your class. I really didn't know what I was doing, but later on, I needed to find an internship, or I wanted to do this thing, so we just did one of the things you taught us about, like writing a cold email, or just taking some of the strategies that we've taught, or that this was the first time they'd ever really been encouraged to work on something that is purely about their own interests, and that ended up informing what they did their thesis on. So there's been a lot of stories like that have come out, where it's genuinely nice to see whether or not it feels like they are achieving success in the class, that they're still absorbing these skills that are going to go on and help them no matter what they end up doing later.
That's incredible. Craighton, wrap it up with you.
Yeah, for me, my favorite part of teaching this class is imbuing this sense of the joy, the reward, the fulfillment of a personal project. I think the stress, but also the control, the autonomy, all these great factors that come in, or these feelings you have while doing something that's just yours. And I just hope, for me, I think what's most exciting, this is the class I wanted when I was in school. I wanted to know that I could do it myself, how I would do it, and the steps to get there. And this is even better because they're just doing it. And so my hope is that these, even if they go off and get jobs at agencies or corporate jobs or whatever, they still know that if they want to pursue a project at night, like there's nothing in their way and they can do it. It took me 10 years to really realize that, and it just makes me happy that they can do that now, that they can graduate, and whether it's a full-time endeavor or whether it's a part-time hustle, they have this.
That's really incredible. So we have to wrap up. This is like something John and I have talked about, having a conversation like this forever.
This was awesome. It was fantastic.
So good. So we're going to do more on this subject on teaching Kickstarter. You all are sort of the paragons of this for us. We were so lucky to have you somehow magically all find an hour that matched up in your busy schedule. So thank you. And for those of you watching, check out the links in the YouTube video. You're going to see links to each of their project pages, and then dig in. There's syllabus, there's class projects, there's all those Tumblrs that Craighton talked about. There's lots to find, and then we're also going to do a wrap-up post on our Medium publication on this subject, so you can find some of the best nuggets pulled out there. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Good hanging out, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Great hang.
Thank you.